Kelvin Davis.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the member for Wairarapa, Alistair Scott, spoke earlier and he said that the Labour opposition is criticising their budget trajectory. Mr Speaker, we're not criticising the trajectory, we're criticising the deficit, because over the last 3 or 4 years, all we've heard is that this budget is going to deliver a surplus, and it's failed to do that, Mr Speaker.
7 times.
All we've heard are broken promises and squandered opportunities. This budget has done nothing whatsoever to address the real issues that are going on in New Zealand. We also criticise the fact that they've borrowed $84 billion over the last 7 years. The last Labour government left the new national government in a great position, a great opportunity. We had zero government debt, and now we've got $84 billion worth of debt, Mr Speaker. They don't say a lot about that. They keep talking themselves up, but all we can see is $84 billion worth of debt. Now, I don't criticise $790 million going towards family that need it most, but $79 million or $25 per family per week isn't even enough to keep up with the cost of living, Mr Speaker. They seem to forget that Working for Families delivered in 2006 a tax credit, a $60 tax credit for beneficiary families on the benefit as well, Mr Speaker. We hear a lot of talk from there. They're talking themselves up, but the reality is they're not delivering. This government's lost its way. It's failing to meet the needs of New Zealand families, and they have no long-term plan to address the challenges ahead. They're stealing, they're robbing from our children's future just to scrape by in today. This is a government of broken promises. Mr Speaker, we have a beautiful word, a beautiful creature in Māoridom. It's called a kiawai. A kiawai is a freshwater crayfish, and this is a freshwater crayfish moves like this by flapping its legs and moving backwards, and this is what I would say is a kiawai budget, where they're backtracking and backpedaling as fast as they can flap themselves. They promised a surplus, and all we've got is another deficit. 9 surpluses to this side of the House, 7 deficits over there. What would a responsible government do, Mr Speaker? It would grow incomes. This government's failed on that. They promised $7,000, that incomes would grow by $7,000. They've failed to meet that by some $3,000. They'd fix the housing crisis, and Phil Twyford was very eloquent in describing the issues around the housing crisis in Auckland. They haven't hit the speculators, and when they have started to hit the speculators, it's just the Clayton's attack. We're not going to see much difference in what's happened. I think of my nephew. He's very lucky. He bought a house some 5 years ago in Auckland for $400,000. He sold it at the end of last year for $790,000. He's one of the lucky ones, Mr Speaker. But people coming into the housing market now, they're the ones that are going to miss out. A real government would invest in a productive and diverse economy. All this government's doing is relying on dairy and disaster. If it wasn't for the Christchurch earthquake, the growth in our economy would be about 25% less than what it is now. This government needs to prepare New Zealand for the next generation of wealth creation. They're not doing that. They've transformed tertiary education to match skills with future jobs. And actually, by the way, something that we need to keep harping on about is the previous Labour government's record when it comes to unemployment. We got it down to 3.4%. 3.4%, and what has this government done? It's double that now. Not only that, in Whangarei, in 2007, there were 58 people on the unemployment benefit. You could just about name them if you sat down and tried to memorise their names. You could basically do it now. I don't know how many hundreds, if not thousands, are on the unemployment benefit in Whangarei, Mr Speaker. So let's have a listen to some of these broken promises. Well, the surplus, we've already covered that. We've had 7 deficits We're promised that next year will be a surplus now. And actually, let's remember the Minister of Finance's analogy. He said, oh, well, if you're trying to lose 10 kgs to fit a suit for your brother's wedding and you only lose 9.8 kgs, well, what does it matter? I prefer this analogy, Mr. Speaker. When the All Blacks go to the Rugby World Cup this year, in order to bring home that William Webb Ellis trophy, they need a surplus of points, more points than the other team. Now, if they end up with a deficit of points, they're losers. They've lost. And that's what the people of New Zealand are losing because of this budget. What else? Jobs and wages. So this is John Key's open letter to New Zealanders after the election. He promised over the next 2 years we expect to see about 150,000 jobs created. National will fall $60,000 short on that promise. Then there's the KiwiSaver Kickstart, Mr. Speaker, $1,000, robbing our children's future to scrape by in today. That's unacceptable. Then we have new taxes. Of course, we're told no new taxes. That was an election promise. No new taxes. Well, we've got a new capital gains tax that isn't really a capital gains tax. We've got an airport tax that isn't really a tax, it's a levy. We've got a broadband tax. Then what's the next one? National promise to increase exports to 40% of GDP. Well, that's heading south as well, Mr. Speaker. Then there's the regions. Well, the regions, they spoke. Northland spoke. They've been forgotten. We were promised 10 bridges by the Minister, Simon Bridges. Thank God his name isn't Simon Tunnels, or else we'd have 10 tunnels going through Northland. Mr. Speaker, it's a reckless budget. I just want to touch on the police estimates, Mr. Speaker, because the poor police, they're doing a great job out there, but they're just getting no budget increases. And in fact, they've had $15 million in cuts this year. Now, I know the Minister is going to get up here and he's going to say, oh no, that's not true. We're implementing $160 million in new initiatives. Well, really what the Minister has done is taken a pack of cards, he shuffled it, he's allowed a few cards to fall out onto the floor, then he's redealt them and he's saying that it's all new money. Well, I can tell everyone that it's not new money, $15 million less. Now, let's just have a look and let's just use the estimates which came out last week. If we look at the columns there, in budget 2014-15, the final budgeted amount was $1.624 billion, and in the estimated actual was $1.624 billion. What's 2015-2016's budget? 1.609. That is a budget cut, and no minister can walk in here and say that they've increased the funding for police. It is here in black and white that they have cut the police budget, and that is unacceptable. But when you look through the police budget, Mr. Speaker, what do you see? You see that their targets are more on revenue collecting. For example, they've got greater targets in chasing down people using cell phones. I think they're trying to double the number of people they want to catch who are using cell phones, incorrect lane changing, warrants of fitness, and yet people like our colleague, poor Phil, the Honourable Phil Goff, who had his motorbike pinched, he ain't going to see that again because the high volume, those really irritating crimes such as theft, burglary, assault, shoplifting, they're not putting as much money into that. And in fact, that's where many of the cuts are coming, Mr. Speaker. Speeding, they're going to chase up, they want to catch more people, but they're actually giving the police less money in order to do these, to catch speeders. The heavy vehicle fleet, I take it that's catching trucks who are overloaded. Fatigue and distraction, there's taken away $133,000 for that. Traffic management, it's taken away $408,000 from that. Alcohol and impaired drivers. Now, you'd think that that would be a massive priority. They're taking away $2.815 million from there. High-risk drivers, they're removing $5.128 million from there. So they're asking the police to do more to catch more people. They're giving them less money, but these are all high revenue collecting crimes, Mr. Speaker, rather than going out and really catching those criminals that are breaking into homes and, like I say, stealing the Honourable Phil Goff's motorcycle. Mr Speaker, this budget does not deliver. I'd really like to carry on about the corrections, and there's a big mess there, and it all comes around the private prison circo, which is a direct transfer of jobs from the public sector through to the private sector. Mr Speaker, unfortunately, my time has expired. Kia ora.
Nook Karako.
Kia ora, te mana whakawa.